Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Megaman Rock and Roll. In the last part we started off the game and took out a few Robot Masters in the process, and now it's about time we head after our next Robot Master. And we're heading after a rather unique one that I've seen in the franchise, fan-made or otherwise, Drakeman. Not often we see a very animalistic styled Robot Master. That's usually something people save for X-series fan efforts and such. As you might be able to tell based off what these dragonflies are shooting out, Drakeman stage is the fire level for the game, and that comes with most of the usual trappings. Fire hazards, lava pits that'll be instant kill, I think Mega Man 1 change key trap enemies, I forget the name of those things. But we also get a nice little Mega Man X reference in these collapsing rock pillars that are right out of Flame Stag stage almost. Though unlike the ones in that stage, these collapse so slowly it's seldom a threat. What is a threat timing-wise is these next three screens. This lava is rising at an accelerating rate. If you take too long, it'll catch right up with you, and well, then you're dead. This section wouldn't be too bad if the rock and roll letter wasn't in this, meaning you had to get through this really perfectly to get it. This is my least favorite rock and roll letter in the game. Thankfully, I got it, I think, on my second try here, but on the first run, that took me about 20 minutes to get, which, yikes. Thankfully, they do realize that rushing through there, you're going to take a good amount of hits, so they placed Eddie right there to give you some extra health, just to top you off, just in case. Also, I love this song. Mind you, this game's soundtrack, as has been patterned for all the Mega Man fan projects I've done, is fantastic. Now, there's actually a little thing to keep in mind about this particular room, but I'm not going to be able to show that off until towards the end of the part, or is that from 2 stages from now? Either way, I'll show it off then. So, keep in mind, later on, I'll be cutting back to this room. Thankfully, Rock and Roll is one of the few Mega Man fan games I think I've ever played where you can actively revisit stages, in the case you want to grind for E-tanks or W-tanks, or I guess W-tank, singular. So, you don't have to worry about missing out on anything. And that's good, given a certain other mechanic of the game we'll be seeing for the first time relatively shortly. This is a stage where I feel like even on your first run you should take in roll, though, because the double jump can save you from a lot of the fire traps in the last second if you're not being careful. Oh, look, an optional path. Let's see what's down here. Hey, I know that tile set. You might recall back in the intro stage, 4 particular Robot Masters got kidnapped. There's a reason for this. Throughout 4 of the stages in the game, there are hidden pathways reminiscent of their stages that lead you to a boss fight against them. They each have their own weakness chain. Fireman here is weak to Polar Man, and they're very reminiscent fights to their original game, but Fireman here is much more active. First off, not every fire wave will leave a fire below you. He has his own little Heat Man ability where he'll send a giant fire wave across the screen, and he can also now fire his standard fire attacks from mid-air, though he only did that in the second fight, in my case, because I do die here. This entire mechanic, though, makes me have to go a bit further out of the way than one would think, as to have as many weaknesses as possible for later on in the game. I'm gonna need to break from the weakness chain for one stage, but that one weakness chain makes everything else flow together so much better. With that, though, we're on to Drakeman, who is weak against the bubble shield, or shield bubble. I think it's the latter. And the shield bubble will actively protect you against his fireball attacks. Heading in with it can be a bit awkward, but otherwise, he just likes to hang onto the walls, fly across the screen, shoot his fireballs across the screen, and whenever he gets low, he's either going to jump on the platform and try to jump across it, or he'll jump and then do an immediate flyby to the top opposite end of the screen, which is surprisingly easy to get hit by. Casually and without his weakness, he's probably one of the hardest Robot Masters in the game. But with his weakness, he's not too bad. But for beating him, we do get one of my favorite abilities in the game. I believe it's just called the Fire Breath. You shoot a giant ball of fire out of your mouth. Pretty self-explanatory, but it can not only melt certain hazards, or to allow you to access secondary pathways, but if it hits an enemy, that enemy won't die immediately. They will instead be singed black and then explode in the 4 diagonal directions with fireballs that can do some decent damage to enemies. For just rushing through a stage, it's honestly one of my favorite abilities in the game. With that, though, If you're going in weakness order, you want to go for Polar Woman next, but I am instead breaking weakness chain to go after Ghostwoman. Where is she? Hello? Ah! You little... I love this stage. I love castle aesthetics in general, especially when they're non-standard to the series they're appearing in, like Megaman. So this stage just makes me smile from the visual standpoint alone. Plus, I love the background. Mind you, the backgrounds in this game are really well done because there's a lot of parallax going on. It looks really good. Similarly to Drakeman stage, though, I'm going to be cutting back to this stage later on after I beat it, because there is another secret in this stage that I can't show off until I get something for beating 4 Robot Masters. If you take either a certain ability later on or the shield bubble, though, you can cross over to here and... Gee, what does this aesthetic look like, If you're thinking Mega Man 4, you're right, because it's Skullman time. He's weak against the Blast Missile, and he works quite a bit differently than his initial incarnation. He'll fire 3 skull bullets out at you, I know 4, and then summon them back to him to become his Skull Shield, in which case he'll run towards you, and whenever you jump over him, he'll then coagulate all of these skulls together into a charge shot, shoot it at you, and then the fight loops from there. It's a very fun fight of pattern recognition. It's probably one of my favorite boss fights in the game. And I'm glad, because looking back, Skullman was a pretty boring fight in Mega Man 4. Mind you, looking back in general, most of the Robot Master patterns weren't exactly anything special until maybe Mega Man 9 or 10. Somewhat Mega Man 8 and 7. So, having like an 8-bit classic game with actual boss patterns that are fun to fight and memorize is rare. And this next couple screens is another indication of why you should always play roll. Double jumps are great. Also, yeah, this is the Yoku Block stage. The Yoku Block patterns in this game aren't really much to worry about. It's surprisingly uncomplicated. This is the screen, by the way, I'll be cutting back to, because I actually could have gotten the thing, I think, right now. I just forgot to. And now we got a bit of an interesting take on a mini-boss. We actually aren't supposed to shoot the mini-boss at all. We're supposed to avoid its attacks. The things we need to attack are the gears on the side of the screen. As you can see, whenever we take out a gear, it's getting, the mini-boss is sinking lower and lower. You can probably logic out what's going to happen from there. With that said, whenever it's ringing its bell, I do recommend staying in one of the corners because its little explosion radiuses for the rings of the bell are surprisingly large, and they hurt a decent bit. Thankfully, this game is also a bit kind in giving you life energy, usually after a mini-boss, so I'm glad about that. This is probably the most complicated screen in the game for the Yoku Blocks, and even then, it's nothing too bad. You just have to keep in mind you have to want to go low here, while not horrifically messing up your jump, because this is where the rock and roll letter is for this stage. I think my favorite thing about this stage visually, though, is related to the background again. I love how detailed the moon is. A good moon sprite is just a way to get into my heart, no matter what game it is. It's one of the reasons I really like the final stage of the first Castlevania, because I like the moon in that stage. Though I do question why the clouds look like an assault rifle. That's just weird. Obviously unintentional, but still funny. The Fire Breath is probably my favorite special ability to use as a standard weapon, just because it'll kill most enemies in like 2 shots, and the ability to hit other targets from there is just great. Now, I don't have Ghostwoman's weakness, which is Reactor Man's weapon, so I'm fighting her Buster only, and as a fight, she's a really fun one. She'll disappear right off the bat, and at that point, she'll either appear in one of the windows or behind you as a shadow, in which case she'll zoom out of the shadow and try to throw a few spirit traps at you. What you need to do if you get captured by one of those, if you don't dodge them all, is mash your buttons like nothing else, because it's the only way you're getting out of there. From there, she'll generally do several flybys at you in alternating directions, left to right to left to the right. Don't try and mash your buttons if you even attack her at all during that. If you do, only go for one shot, because it's all you're going to have time for without getting hit. Whenever she appears in one of the windows, she is going to summon some little ghost buddies to attack you, usually in groups of 3. You can shoot them yourself, but you can also just wait for them to disappear, as they'll do that eventually. That's one of the few times I don't recommend firing on her, as once she summons the ghosts, just focus on dodging, because that's where her pattern's going to take you from there. In execution, it's a surprisingly hard fight to do Buster only. Probably one of the harder ones in the game. But again, really fun pattern to go around. I really like. This is one of the few fan games I think I've outright tried to Buster only because I find the patterns that fun to dodge. Usually there's one or two bosses that I'm like, I won't do this because it's annoying in, but there's very few of them in this game beyond maybe Drakeman. And for beating her, we get Soul Trap. This doesn't look like much of an ability. You can aim it up, down, but if you hit an enemy with it, they get trapped, and you can then use them as a bigger projectile to hit enemies with, which will do a lot of damage. You can also aim that up or down depending on where you hit it during your jump. And for beating 4 stages, we now get rolls equivalent to Rush. Beat comes back and is helping us out. And I do like the little nod to Mega Man 4 with Kalinka and Cossack there. That's really cool. The physics for Beat Lift are a bit weird in that you're constantly moving up and down, so your ascension isn't exactly smooth. But with that, I can now show off the 2 secrets I was talking about earlier. First off, back here in Drakeman stage, in this part of the stage, you can either use Rush Jet when we eventually get that, or Beat Lift to come over here to find not only some weapon energy, but an E-Tank. As well as a reference to one of the dragons. I think that's the one from Mega Man 9. And in Ghostwoman stage, at this screen, you can also fly up to the top of this particular piece of the stage. Hey, Nightman! Thanks, Nightman. Yeah, Yamato Man's kind of a dick, isn't he? With that, we must go! On to the next stage. Next up, we are heading after Polar Woman, who is weak to Drakeman's weapon, so now we're back on the weakness chain. As one might be able to glean from her look and name, Polar Woman's stage is the ice level for the game, which comes with the usual trappings for that with ice physics. The ice physics aren't too annoying, especially with roll, because the double jump allows you to completely neglect those. But there's still going to be a good amount of times you're walking around and you might want to jump to keep your momentum in check. An interesting mechanic for this stage, though, is the whale mini-boss from, I think that was Dive Man stage in Mega Man 4. They will shoot out spurts of water that you use as platforms. However, you need to be careful with them because very often, in order to reach the platform they're trying to take you to, you actually need to be at the bottom of the water spurts to gain momentum, as just going to the top of it will just not push you up nearly enough. There's also these claws, which will just carry you and you can jump out of them. Very often they'll try to trap you with enemies around them though, so be careful, or there might be spikes. Also, I really love this Snowman enemy. It reminds me a lot of the chicken from, I think that was Mega Man 5. But I just love its little animations. It's so cute. This is the screen where the momentum of the whale spurts are really gonna be the make or break of your platforming, because if you're not going in too early, you're probably just gonna fall right into the bottomless pit below you. Also, a weird little thing. And I understand why this is, because airtime-wise. If you double jump before getting into the water spurt, you're not going to be able to double jump again with roll because you've already used it up. That ice block there is one of the ones you can melt with fire breath. And an odd thing that I think only comes into play in one room in this stage, I think it may have been earlier even, is whenever you melt something with fire breath, the water that it melts into will then fill a little container below it, but that doesn't actually impact anything. It's just a cool little detail. Skip this platform with shield bubble because I don't like that room. What you're supposed to do there, the icicles on the ceiling, you can shoot them to make them fall, and once they hit the water, they'll then act as platforms, so you're supposed to jump from one to the other. But it's just such precarious platforming that I don't want to do it, so I'll just shield bubble through it all. Also notable, the waterfalls throughout this stage, particularly in that room and a couple others later on, they actively hide things beneath them. So there might be a lack of platform there might be a platform there. In fact, the rock and roll letter is behind one later on. That W-tank there, by the way, is not worth the time or accidental hitting the spikes that can happen, because that happened to me quite a few times on my first playthrough because I was being greedy. I don't know why, I've always really liked shoot a thing to make it a platform type mechanics. Also, look right here, you barely see it, but the edge of the rock and roll letter is visible. I think that completes the roll letters, I think? I want to say every boss that has a rock and roll letter is confined to the left and right sides of the screen respectively, but I might be a bit wrong on that. Either way, it's time for Polar Woman herself. She's weak to the fire breath, and Polar Woman pulls a bit of a, I want to say it was Crash Man and Mega Man 2, where she tries to bait you into jumping. She'll dash towards you, but right before reaching you, do a flip jump over you, in which case she'll shoot some little ice hearts at you. Her other attack is to make ice out of the ground itself, which kind of like the chill spike from Mega Man 10, but if you're just moving, that won't be much of a threat. And she can also generate snowballs to throw at you, which will get progressively larger as they travel along the floor, I believe. The Flame Breath, though, takes care of those projectiles completely, so you don't really need to worry about them. With her weakness, she's one of the easiest bosses. Without it, she can be a bit tricky at first just due to the trap nature of her attacks, but she's still really fun. And for beating her, we get my least favorite weapon in the game, the Snow Roller. It'll bounce along the floor, but you can also charge up to make it larger and use up some more weapon ammunition. And if you freeze an enemy with it, they will then act as a platform for you to use. That is a feature I seldom use, but it's there. And since we now have all 4 of the roll letters, we get the upgrade for that. Whenever Roll now does a double jump, you can hold the button on the double jump to hover a little bit further. It's not a complete glide, but it does help getting more distance, which means it's really useful. You can turn it off on the pause menu whenever you want. Same with the rock letter upgrade we'll get, I think, next part. But let's be real, you're probably not going to be turning these off unless you're a purist. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 3, more Robot Masters. See you guys then.